Welcome to Business Success Tips, where you learn to make more money in less time and especially have more fun. I'm your host, the founder of Contractor Staffing Source, where we help contractors build great teams. That was my guest this morning, Karalynn Cromeens, and she's an attorney. Don't freak out, guys. It's good news. I know. When I got the invite from her, the first thing I did was, oh my God, what do I do wrong now? You never want to hear from an attorney. It's like never good news. So I'm glad it's just a podcast. That's a good thing. So Carolyn, I love your Get Shit Done logo. How did you come up with that? And what exactly do you do?
Okay, so Get Shit Done is because that's who I represent. I call them the Get Shit Done crew. They're the people that are out there working, doing that, building things, actually getting things done. And they need, if you're in construction, you need legal help. And I try to do it on the preventative side. So it's not, we're in the middle of a mess and trying to figure it out. So, contracts, we do contract reviews, contract creations, flat fees, all kind of litigations. But our main focus is to help our contractors run better businesses by protecting them legally. And that's through, liens, collections, all the different kinds of things.
Okay. So what size contractors do you work with? Any size or?
Yes, mom and pop, single owned, small ones, all the way up to, probably 10, $12 million. When they get much bigger than that, they tend to get in-house counsel. But yeah, anybody in the industry that needs help. And actually the firm had started because in my last year of law school, my husband and I started a material supply company. And I wasn't really planning on going into construction law, but I grew up in the construction industry, and then running our own business as a material supply company, I couldn't work on another job. I had to start my own firm. So that was my main focus of learning how to collect our money, read our contracts, do all that. And that was 20 years ago.
I see.
So,
Okay, well, I've been I've had like a couple thousand clients for the last 4 years, and several of them gotten sued for all kinds of crazy reasons, right? And usually it's because they didn't have their act together when they started, right? And it's sort of like resurrection started at birth, because, oh God, I screwed up, and how do I do now? So a couple things that have showed up for me in the last few years. One is wrongful termination suits. Depends on the state you're in, if you know what I mean. I come from California, the guy said, well, it's an at-will state, and good luck with that. So what happens is the client, and probably fired for very good reason. I mean, because the guy didn't show up for work. Who knows? I had one guy, I think it was in Wisconsin or someplace, where the woman did not show up. He fired her. She got sued. He settled for like $40,000. It's the fourth time she'd done it. That's what she does for a living. She gets hired, gets discriminated against, gets fired, and then sues people. And that's legal. I go, how do you do that? So how does one prevent those kind of like employees coming after you?
Okay, so I can't stop anybody from suing anyone, because it
Right.
doesn't, you can sue anyone for anybody. It doesn't mean you're going to win.
Right.
And once you get into litigation, the expense of it. And so although they might not be entitled to it, they're looking at allocation of the risk, right? It's
Right.
cheaper to pay her something now than to litigate this thing, which will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Sort of like legal blackmail.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what it is. But the best thing that contractors can do to protect themselves is if they need an employee handbook that has anti-discrimination policies, has a write-up policy, like, what happens when you don't show up for work, and how this termination will happen. And if we follow those processes and we'll document that they got a write-up and they were told here they couldn't do it again, that is the best tool you have in defense of wrongful termination. Is that, hey, no, the termination was for cause. Here was the employee handbook that they signed off on. Here is the write-ups that they were given before they were terminated, and all the chances that were given. And, that they were terminated for cause and not wrongfully terminated. So, and, it's kind of, especially when you're starting from a small business and you get your first employee, it's like, you don't even think about it, right?
Right.
You don't even think about all the stuff that you should be doing when you get an employee, like background checks, making sure they have a driver's license, all of that stuff. But one or two employees, even if you found some form on the internet that was free and you filled it in on your own, is probably better than having nothing. And then following the process for write-ups. And that way that you can prove that the termination was for cause. Because you can say all day, they didn't show up for work and that's why I fired him. But if you don't have any documentation showing they didn't show up on this day and I wrote them up, they didn't show up on this day and I wrote them up, and that they were warned that if they did it again, they would be terminated. So the best thing you can have to protect yourself is a paper trail.
Okay, that's good. And I tell people to lay people off, because the rules for laying someone off aren't quite as stringent as the rules for firing somebody. what I've noticed is, you know, you're two guys in a truck and you're held to the same standards as Walmart. It's crazy, right? I mean, that's not fair,
Yeah, I
but
agree. I agree. And unfortunately, most of these guys learn the hard way that this is
right,
what we need to do. And so, you know, if you're, you know, you have more than 2 or 3 employees, then it's worth the investment of finding someone to do. And we do employee handbooks on a flat fee. There are
right,
plenty, even borrowing somebody else's, having
right, something, right.
Mhm.
Now, the other one that happens a lot is I have a lot of clients that build for wealthy people. And the problem is they're showing up with a gun and you have a knife. I mean, they've got a you know, bunch of attorneys and you're always going to lose. I mean, pretty much because so my suggestion is you don't get where they owe you a lot of money because, you know, I've had guys that just, it's sort of like for fun. They go, well, I could, you know, I'd rather pay my attorney than pay you. So see me in court. It's crazy.
Well, and here too, and that's why a contract, especially in residential construction with wealthy homeowners, is hugely important, right? And one of the big things that you put in your contract is, hey, if I don't receive payment, first off, you can't do this in some states, is drawing in advance, right? You draw and then you
Right.
work. Some states allow that, some states don't.
Well,
California,
California's got this stupid rule that you actually can't do cost plus. I got a
gotcha.
guy being held back for 100 grand because they went to the attorney and said, "Oh, cost plus isn't legal in California." Everybody does it, but it's technically not legal, so he can't get his $100,000. It's crazy.
Yeah. The contract is key, and California is highly regulated. There's some other states, but leaving yourself a provision in there. If I, you know, submit an invoice, a milestone invoice for payment, and I'm unpaid for 5 days, I can stop working, right? If you don't put that in your contract, that's not necessarily the right that you have. So being upfront about, you know, and like you're saying, that will stop them getting too far into you and getting it backwards where they owe you, because then they
Right.
have all the money, they have all the attorneys, and it's not even winning in court. It's the time, the effort, and the money that it even takes to get to court and have that fight. It's not fast.
It's not really. It's just like fraud and termination. It's easier to pay them $30,000 and fight them. It's blackmail. Just I'll pay them and get rid of it. So
Unfortunately.
unfortunately, most contractors don't have good legal counsel in the sense they don't look. I need a good attorney, a good CPA, you know, a team, right? They go
Exactly.
out there and then they get in trouble and they go crap, and then they got to go find somebody to try to drag them out, right? Which is always
Yeah.
hard. So what would you suggest for a small contractor? Can they like contact you and have like you on retainer, or just make sure that they've got their legal act together? Because I know most contractors don't.
Absolutely. And so like I offer a free 30-minute consultation. So most of the people I talk to throughout the day don't hire me when they initially talk to me. We talk about an issue. I give them some ways to resolve it. If they don't resolve it, they come back. But we have what's called a general retainer, and it makes us your law firm for whatever you need, collections, contracts, disputes, all that thing. And to get started, it's $2,500. And it basically makes me on call for whatever you need. And then we send bills as you do work. If there's no work, then there's no bills. But that way, that part's already figured out. So when you get that nasty demand letter or something, you just pick up the phone and say, hey, I got this. What are we going to do? Right.
Okay.
The worst thing that contractors do is ignore legal problems. Right.
Right.
And I promise you, if you ignore a demand letter, if you ignore a lawsuit, they will get bigger. Don't ignore them.
It never gets better. Now the other thing that I've had recently happen, which is new, is that this whole cybersecurity thing. I've had a couple of people. A specific example is I had one contractor whose bookkeeper, they got hacked, they didn't know it, and then somebody was, you know, pretending to be the bookkeeper. And so the bank, not real bank, said, can you transfer the money to this account? So they changed like the account, the routing number by 3, right? So they changed the routing number, they transferred 80,000 to the wrong account. They're done. I mean, you know, and then the bank says, not our problem, because you didn't transfer to us, you transferred to this other person. And they go, yeah, but you said you were the bank. And they go, yeah, it wasn't us, it was somebody else. What do? You're just screwed. I don't know.
It kind of depends. And I know there's certain types of insurance you can give to prevent that, because it's happening more and more often. The main thing you can do is do not trust any wire transfer chains or anything via email. It happens all the time. I get emails from my so-called employees asking me to change their bank accounts where I mail their paycheck to, right? So do not trust anything via email. Look for insurance. Like if you're the person that was owed the money and didn't get paid, you may still have lien rights, right? But if you're the person who wrongfully sent the money, there's not a whole lot that you have, unless you can find out who sent the email, which is
not possible. I mean, I've had this, I've never had before, and I have it like 3 or 4 times this year, and it's like 80,000. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's the downside of AI. They're getting really good at this.
Exactly. And it's getting worse and worse. And like, that's why I'd like tell my clients, don't take wire transfer stuff via email, or especially, and because you look at the email, it looks right. If you actually click on it, you'll see that the email address is usually not coming from the person you think it is.
Well, they're getting better at faking email addresses, and it's usually it's a same Chase bank account has one routing number different, and
Yeah.
it's really tough to detect. So,
No, I know.
the answer is there is insurance against, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
There's also insurance against wrongful termination, I think, which you can get, which is
Yeah,
useful.
I agree. Yep.
So I
Yep.
think you need to attorney up and insurance up just because we're in this environment, right?
No,
I mean,
exactly. And I don't think cyber attacks are going to get any less likely,
no,
especially your email accounts.
they're just getting better and better at all this kind of
I
stuff.
know. I know.
Okay, the other kind of thing is collections. I hit a lot of people where they don't get paid. And so what can you do? The client owes you, pick a number, $100,000, and they didn't pay you because they didn't like to tell their child. They just pick one, doesn't matter. They say, I'm not going to pay you. What can you do?
Okay, so actually in the construction industry, there are some good protections. Your mechanics lien rights, right? So generally speaking, when you have a contract with somebody, just like if you have a contract with your Home Depot credit card, if you were not to pay them, what they can do is sue you for breach of that contract for non-payment, and then try to find assets to collect. So it's an unsecured debt, right?
Right.
Us as contractors, we have that breach of contract agreement, but we can also secure the amount that we're owed with a lien against the property, which then makes us a secure debtor, just like a mortgage company,
But if you
right?
don't file a pre-lien, you can't do that, right?
It depends on each state, right? California, Florida, there's several states that have pre-lien notices. Every state, there's literally 50 different ways to do the same thing. So
Yes.
it really depends on the state that you're in. I've studied all of them, and they're very different. So like
Right.
Texas, you don't have to send your first notice to the 15th day of the third month after you're owed money.
Right.
So whatever your state is, I have a website. Actually, it's going to be on my website soon, the Cromeens Law Firm, where it tells you the basic outline for each state. So if you know you have to send a pre-lien notice or not,
Right.
but find out what the lien rights are in your state, and then make sure that you secure your lien right timely. So now you have a secured debt and you still have your unsecured claim, but that, they can't sell it. They can't mortgage it. They can't go from construction financing to permanent financing without addressing the lien. So it really gives you a way more leverage than just a breach of contract claim, because we could sue in court on breach of contract for years, right? But
Right.
having a lien on somebody's property is securing the debt, but also makes the property, they can't do anything with it until they take care of the lien.
Okay. Now, you've been working with a contractor many years. What do you find is the common mistakes that small contractors make legally that they shouldn't? What are like the typical kind of things that they don't
So,
do?
so I'll take this in two different ones, because residential and commercial clients are way
Most
different.
let's start with residential. All right.
Okay,
Most
so let's see, the number one thing that they don't have a written contract, right? They may have an estimate, which is better than nothing, but there's still a lot of terms and conditions that need to be addressed, like change orders, right? Milestone payments. They're not covering themselves, and they don't realize until it's too late, right? The other
Yeah.
thing too is that what I put in my contractor's contract is the contractor has the right to end the contract at any point in time, right? Because if you don't put that in there and something goes wrong and you don't want to continue the job, you don't have a choice.
I had some guys that where they had to, it was a terrible client. They were psychotic, for lack of a better term. This lady's crazy, or guys, I do not deal with them, and they walk off the job and they get sued for abandonment or something, right?
Yeah, and that's what happens. So when you sign a contract with somebody, you're making a promise. You're saying, okay, I'm going to do this remodel work for $100,000. Stuff goes sideways. You end up just walking away from the job. You think you're just walking away from the money that you're owed. That is not true, because what happens is now these homeowners got to hire somebody else to do that remodel work. And let's say it costs them $150,000 to do the same scope of work.
Right.
So you're on the hook for the 50 that they spent over what you promised.
Right.
So don't walk away from a job. Don't get terminated. If you leave yourself an out like, hey, I have the right to end this contract at any time, then it's not a termination. Then you're just ending the agreement, and you're not up to those damages, right? So,
Right.
That's another thing that they do that can hurt them. Another thing too that I highly recommend is, I have that in the contract, but if you're a contractor that is a remodeler or some kind of design work has to be done on the front end, that you're usually getting permits for and doing all that, and you're doing it for free to get the job, have a design agreement, right? That way you get paid for all that work you're doing for free. You're up front. At the end of it, they own it. That's great. They can take it somewhere else
Right.
if they want to. Most of them will end up hiring you, but it also gives you a chance to work with that person before you get into this big project and realize, hey, they're kind of crazy. I don't think I want to work with them.
Right.
And the other thing they don't either is like 90% of the guys that get sued that come into my office tell me, I knew I shouldn't have done this job.
I've worked with 1,000 contractors, and I said, did you get that gut feeling that you shouldn't do this when you agree? Yeah, but I needed the work, or whatever you say come up with, right? But I think people's intuition are pretty good. And if your gut says don't do it, just don't do it.
Yeah, I know. I'm actually working on my third book called Trust Your Gut, and it's about residential contracts. And it's such the same story. It's like, I know you
Yeah,
need
but at
work,
some
and
level, your intuition just says this is a bad idea, right?
exactly. Let them go be somebody else's nightmare.
Right. And the other thing is, now I sometimes suggest, I don't know if you just that people put a contract with their subcontractors, that they have contracts with their subcontractors, like if I don't get paid, you don't get paid.
Absolutely.
Because lots of times what will happen is the client won't pay you, and the contract and the sub says, not my problem, right? You got to pay me anyway, even though they didn't pay you. But you can put a clause in there that prevents that in most states, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's enforceable in all states. And two, it also gives you some control because a lot of times what happens is that the sub's not getting paid because there's something wrong with their work, right?
Right.
And if you don't have a subcontract agreement that says I don't have to pay you, unless the owner pays me, they're gonna want payment. And there's nothing, they're legally correct. They could sue you for payment even though you haven't been paid by the owner. So
Right.
a subcontract agreement, I think, is hugely important. We do one, it's called the master subcontract agreement. We do on a flat fee. And the master part, the sub signs once, right? And it has the insurance requirements, all, that they're an independent contractor, all of that stuff. And then
Right.
for each job, you just issue them a work order. And that's important for that reason, but it's important for a lot of other reasons. Number one is certificate of insurance, right? We all think if we get the certificate of insurance that we're covered. Not necessarily true. If you want to be covered by their insurance, you have to be added as additionally insured. Because here's why. Okay, say you're on a job, the sub, accidentally leaves the tarp off the roof and it floods the house, right?
Right.
And so now we got this issue. You have a certificate of insurance. You try to go make a claim on his insurance. They deny the claim, not because it's not covered, but because you're not the insured. So basically, your sub would have to file the claim to be insured. If you were listed as additionally insured, then you can file the claim for that kind of damage and it would be honored. And
Right.
so getting a certificate of insurance is great, but making sure you are added as additionally insured is really what you're looking for.
Right. So that's another issue that comes to subcontractors. Now what happens if you have somebody who's not a legal guy? I'm sure you've been there, right? And I don't know if you found him Home Depot, he's a nephew of somebody that works for you, picking them, right? Comes to work for you. You don't have all the right papers or whatever. And either the immigration department comes and hauls him off, which is a possibility, or he gets hurt, right? And his nephew's an attorney. And so who knows, right? And so all of a sudden, what are the liabilities of hiring somebody who's not legal?
So it's not so much that it's not legal, there are tax ramifications for that, but the liability of somebody gets hurt and you don't have workers' comp, that's a big problem, right? And so that's another great reason for a subcontract agreement. So like if the guy's a sub and he signs a subcontract agreement, it's his guy that gets hurt on the job, right? They can't come after you because he's not an employee. You're only responsible for somebody who gets hurt if they're an employee. And if you have an agreement and they're actually sub that says he's a subcontractor, then you're not responsible. So having that agreement also puts you in a place where you're protected from those kind of claims. Like if you don't, you will get sued by the employee for, not having worker comp, saying that they were an employee. They may sue the homeowner as well to get under their insurance for coverage.
Right.
So it could be a big
And
mess.
what about the famous 1099 issue, right? Who's 1099 and who's not? I've had this
Okay,
actually,
I have my notes because there's a 6-factor test, right?
I
That the courts look at. But in contracting, the big thing that you're looking at is the element of control, right? If the guy is only working for you, he's, using your tools, he's showing up when you tell him to, and he's not working for anybody else, that's an employee, right? Now, if it's a subcontracting company that does other jobs, is not always on your job, creates his own schedule, then that's a subcontractor. And it's a very painful process if you classify somebody incorrectly and get caught doing it. Because you get sued for misclassification. That's a federal lawsuit. California has even more stringent laws than the federal laws. And the first thing they do in federal court is they request your employment history and all of your employees for the last 3 years to invite them to this lawsuit because they may have been misclassified as well. So you think it'd be just settling with this one employee. The other side is not even going to consider settling until they get that list and invite everybody to the party.
I see. So it sucks, bottom line.
Yes.
I know a lot of people out there, they're trading that 1099. I don't want to pay W-2 because of blah, blah, blah. And I figure they can get by with it. Well, he just works for me, but he has a side job on weekends. So they come up with something, right? Like, but the reality is, in most cases, you're going to lose.
Yeah. And yeah, and it's usually pretty painful when you lose, depending on. And so it is, and there's nothing wrong with starting to correct it if you know it's wrong, right? And starting to get, move them to an employee handbook, start moving them to an employee. It could still come up, but the damages will be a lot less, right? So there's no reason to not work on fixing it if you know that it's an issue.
I'm sure. Does that come up for you occasionally? I'm sure it's
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, it happens all the time. And then so you get the federal one, and then you get the state people that'll also ask for paperwork and look at the same things. And so it's not, you think it's just that one employee. It just gets so much bigger.
It's just not worth the risk, as I see it. Just not.
I
mean, you're saving a little on taxes, but what your liability you're soaking up is crazy.
I agree.
Especially, if you've got a 1099 falls off the roof and breaks his neck, you're so screwed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he's really an employee and you don't have workers' comp. Yeah. Your general liability is not going to cover that.
No.
No.
So I'm sure if people are listening to this, they're not happy at this moment. Crap, right? Well, I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years, and it's a mistake not to have your legal butt covered. It just is,
I agree. And it's only a matter of time before you realize you're exposed, right? And so it's always, let's have a conversation of what it looks like. What do you need? Contracts are just are a big tool of keeping you out of fights, or if you do get in them, here's the parameters. Here's what I agreed to. Because if you don't have that contract, they can say whatever, right?
Unfortunately, they usually don't hire an attorney until the cat's out of the bag. I mean, that's really bad, right? I mean,
I agree.
I think an attorney should be something it's preventive, not corrective, right?
I agree.
So
absolutely.
I highly recommend, if you do not have an attorney, you get one. And, obviously Karalynn sounds like a really nice person, but you've got to have somebody that looks at your contracts, looks at your books, and prepares you. Because what happens, you have these craftsmen who are, pick one, they're whatever, carpenter, and they go into business. They don't know the rules until they get screwed.
Exactly.
And they go, I can't believe that blah, blah, blah happened. I go, oh, well, dude, you're in trouble. So every contractor, I think, should have an attorney on retainer, just as like they've got a CPA for taxes. They've got to have a team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you don't have the team, if you're going to be in business, when you find out, it's way too late and really expensive.
No, it can be. Absolutely.
It's never good news. So, Karalynn, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
So the CromeensLawFirm.com. You'll find my phone number at 713-715-7334. We work in all states. We do contract reviews, contract creations. Like I said, we really push the preventative measures. I'm also on all the social media platforms under Karalynn Cromeens. You can message me and we can, and my main thing is that I want to talk about whatever issues you have or ideas that you have, things you want to start, or, let's have a conversation. I'm a really good problem solver. That's what I'm good at. Or putting a plan together on how to, make an idea a reality.
So you should be, in my opinion, an attorney should be a part of every contractor's team, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And somebody you ask when you have a question, you're not afraid to call them, right? And
this is going to cost me $200 an hour. I don't want to get on the phone, or $300, pick a number, right? I don't want to do this, right?
Exactly. No. And I really built my law firm around what our company needed when our company needs. So that's why I have a low general retainer, but I'm always on call. We can review a document in a day or two. We built it, we have flat rates, 5 business day turnarounds, because you can't wait. And you need somebody who's going to respond. And attorneys don't actually have a great name for being very responsive.
That is true. Call me king. So, I mean, it's just a requirement, in my opinion, of being a contractor. We're in a legal system. You either like it or don't like it. We're in a tax system. And if you try to avoid the system, if you get in trouble, the system will break you, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. And you can just read the stories of all the contractors that are out there. There's a bunch of groups
I've
out there.
had way too many stories that I tell you, it's like, I can't believe you did X. And it's not about being fair. Forget the whole fair thing. It has nothing to do with being fair. I know there's a story how the law got started, and I guess until backstory here is, I guess two people were fighting, right? And it's in way back in ancient history, and then they kept killing the good guy, and it didn't work. Eventually, they got to a legal battle, so they'd have to go fight for them. Had nothing to do with being fair. Person's got the biggest gun wins. It has zip fair. So if you think, oh, that's not fair, forget that whole thing. It's not about fair.
No.
And that's a problem. A lot of people go into these, they go, oh, well, forget the fair thing. It's not about fair. It's about who has
I tell my clients all the time, you don't want to litigate on principle because you can't afford it. And you don't want to. It's not a smart business decision.
No. And would you rather be rich or right? And being
Exactly.
right in legal does not matter at all. Forget the whole being right thing. It's a bad idea.
And to look at it as a business decision, it's going to cost me this much to do this, or I can spend this money on something else.
And I can't tell you people literally giving people $50,000 to make them go away. And they were totally wrong. But he goes, well, the litigation's 100, paying them off is 50, take your choice.
Exactly.
Right?
But the 100, that doesn't even account for your time having to deal with this, the stress that you're in, the litigation is stressful, especially as being represented by attorney. You don't know the system, you don't know the process, you don't know the outcome. It's stressful.
It will take years off your life. Not a good idea.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. I have a whole theory on why litigation sucks.
All you guys that and girls can be perfect that don't have an attorney, I would suggest you call Karalynn, because if you're in business, you need one.
Absolutely.
Thanks. I really appreciate you being here, Karalynn.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.